If you've ever watched someone celebrate something that never truly belonged to them, then you already know what silence feels like. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that sits in your chest while people laugh around you. The kind where everyone assumes you've already lost. Because that's exactly what happened to me. My own parents handed my older brother the family lake house before my grandfather had even been buried. They hugged him, congratulated him, talked about remodeling plans, picked out new paint colors. My brother walked through every room like he was already king. Then he looked straight at me and smiled. Guess Grandpa finally figured out which son mattered. Everyone laughed, even my mother, even my father. Nobody noticed that I smiled back, not because I'd accepted losing, because Grandpa had taught me something years earlier. Never interrupt someone while they're making a mistake. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 49 years old. I live outside Sandusky, Ohio. For 28 years, I've owned a small excavation and land development company. Nothing flashy, no private jets, no million-dollar watches, no social media posts showing off expensive vacations. Just bulldozers, survey equipment, pickup trucks, early mornings, late nights, and a lifetime spent understanding one thing better than almost anyone else: land. Most people look at a beautiful lake house. I look underneath it. Property lines, access easements, water rights, utility corridors, deed restrictions, mineral ownership. Things most people never think about. Grandpa used to laugh every time I talked like that. "You don't see houses, Danny," he'd say. "You see what they're standing on." He was right. And 7 years before he died, he made sure I'd never forget it. My grandfather, Robert Foster, built everything our family had. He started with a single gravel truck in 1968, worked 16-hour days, saved every penny, bought farmland nobody wanted, waited. Developers came. Roads expanded. Cities grew. The land became worth fortunes. By the time he retired, he wasn't just wealthy, he was respected. People across northern Ohio called him one of the smartest land investors in the state. But to me, he was just Grandpa, the man who taught me how to bait a fishing hook, how to sharpen a pocket knife, how to shake someone's hand, and how to keep my word. My older brother, Ryan, learned something different. He learned how to impress people. Perfect smile, expensive suits, MBA from Chicago, luxury SUV, country club membership. He always looked successful. Whether he actually was, that depended on who you asked. Mom adored him. Dad bragged about him. Every family dinner somehow became another speech about Ryan's latest business deal. Meanwhile, I'd show up covered in dirt after spending 10 hours operating heavy equipment. Nobody asked about my day. That was fine. I wasn't looking for applause. I just wanted honesty. Grandpa noticed. He always noticed. One afternoon, about 8 years before he passed away, we were fishing on Lake Hawthorne, the same lake where the family house sat. It wasn't just any house. It overlooked nearly 40 acres of shoreline, private docks, old oak trees, stone fireplaces, a place that had hosted every Thanksgiving, every 4th of July, every Christmas for over 40 years. To the rest of the family, it was the crown jewel. To Grandpa, it was home. He stared across the water for a long time before speaking. "Danny?" "Yeah?" "Everyone thinks that house is the most valuable thing I own." I shrugged. "Isn't it?" He smiled. "No." I laughed. What could be more valuable? Instead of answering, he handed me an old county survey map, yellow from age, folded dozens of times. Red pencil marks covered one corner. "You see this?" I studied it. Honestly, it looked boring. Just property lines, roads, lot numbers. Then he tapped one narrow strip running between the highway and the lake, only 40 feet wide. It stretched almost half a mile. "What about it?" He grinned. "The most expensive dirt in this county." I frowned. "It doesn't even have a building. It doesn't need one." He folded the map again. "One day, you'll understand." Then he slipped it back into his tackle box. I never forgot that conversation. At the time, I thought he was just telling another one of his old stories. Turns out, he was giving me the biggest clue of my life. Grandpa's health started failing when he turned 86. Heart problems, diabetes, arthritis. The last 2 years weren't easy. Ryan visited occasionally, usually when other relatives were around. Long enough for photographs, long enough for Facebook. Then he'd disappear again. Mom always defended him. "Ryan's busy." Dad agreed. "Important people have responsibilities." Apparently, operating an excavation business wasn't considered important. Funny thing was, when Grandpa needed someone to drive him to doctor's appointments, Ryan was busy. When the roof leaked, Ryan was busy. When a tree fell across the driveway, Ryan was busy. Guess who wasn't? Me. I never kept score. Grandpa did. 3 months before he passed away, he asked me to meet him at the lake house, just the two of us. He sat on the back porch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching the sunset. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes, they were still sharp. "Danny?" "Yeah?" "You trust people too much." I laughed. "Probably." "No." He shook his head. "I know." We sat quietly for a while. Then he looked toward the lake. "When I'm gone, don't fight." I nodded. "I won't." He smiled. "I know." Another pause. "But don't let them steal what's yours either." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he simply patted my shoulder. "You'll know." That was the last real conversation we ever had. Grandpa died on a Tuesday morning, peacefully, in his sleep. The call came just after 6. By noon, the entire family had already started arguing. Not about memories, not about grief, about the estate. Ryan showed up wearing sunglasses worth more than my monthly truck payment. Before Grandpa's body had even left the house, he whispered to Dad, "I assume the lake house stays in the family." I heard him. Dad smiled. "Of course." Mom added, "It belongs with you." Belongs. Interesting choice of words. Nobody had even seen the will, yet somehow they'd already decided. I kept my mouth shut, because grief has a way of revealing who people really are, and my family was putting on quite the show. 5 days later, the funeral drew nearly 300 people, business owners, neighbors, church friends, former employees, people Grandpa had helped over the decades. Stories filled the church, stories about generosity, integrity, hard work, keeping promises. Every single story sounded like the man I knew. After the service, everyone moved to the reception hall. Coffee, sandwiches, homemade pie, quiet conversations. For about 20 minutes, everything felt normal. Then Ryan stood up, tapped a spoon against his coffee cup. "I just want to say something." The room quieted. He smiled confidently. "I know Grandpa would have wanted the lake house to stay with someone who understands business." Several relatives nodded. He continued, "I've already talked with Mom and Dad." My stomach tightened. "We're planning to keep it exactly the way Grandpa would have wanted." Planning? Already? People actually applauded. Then Ryan looked directly at me. "Danny," he smiled confidently, "you probably won't miss it anyway." A few uncomfortable laughs drifted across the room. "I mean," he shrugged dramatically, You've always been more comfortable playing in the dirt than owning waterfront property." More laughter. My father chuckled. My mother smiled. Something inside me went completely still. Not angry, not hurt, just still. Because I remembered Grandpa's words. Never interrupt someone while they're making a mistake. So I picked up my coffee, took one slow sip, and smiled. Nobody noticed. Nobody understood. They were all too busy congratulating Ryan for inheriting something that wasn't fully his. The applause slowly faded. Ryan stood in the middle of the reception hall shaking hands like he'd just won an election. People congratulated him. "Your grandpa would be proud. That lake house couldn't be in better hands. You'll make great memories there." He thanked every one of them, like the decision had already been made, like Grandpa's signature didn't matter anymore. I quietly carried my empty coffee cup to the trash. Then a familiar voice stopped me. "Danny." I turned around. Standing near the doorway was Margaret Collins, Grandpa's attorney. She'd handled every contract Grandpa signed for nearly 30 years. Small woman, gray hair, sharp blue eyes. The kind of attorney who spoke softly because she never needed to raise her voice. She glanced toward Ryan, then back at me. "Don't leave." I frowned. I wasn't planning to. She nodded. "Good. There are still a few things your grandfather wanted handled today." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. 20 minutes later, the immediate family gathered inside Grandpa's study at the lake house. The same room where he'd signed hundreds of land deals. Old oak desk, leather chairs, maps covering one wall, framed aerial photographs. The smell of cedar and old books. Ryan sat in Grandpa's favorite chair without asking. Mom smiled proudly. Dad poured himself a drink. Margaret placed a thick leather folder on the desk. "Before we discuss the estate," Ryan interrupted, "we already know Grandpa wanted the house to stay in the family." Margaret calmly looked over her glasses. I'm sure Mr. Foster anticipated that assumption. The room became quiet. She opened the folder. "This is Robert Foster's last will and testament." For the next 20 minutes, she read through gifts to charities, scholarships, church donations, long-time employees. Nobody interrupted. Brian barely listened. He only cared about one thing. Finally, Margaret reached the real estate section. "My residence, known as Foster Lake House," Ryan smiled, "including the improvements located upon Parcel 17. He looked at me with a grin. "Shall transfer to my grandson, Ryan Foster." Mom clapped softly. Dad smiled. Ryan leaned back with a satisfied laugh. "I knew it." He looked directly at me. "No hard feelings, little brother." I smiled politely. "None." Margaret never looked up. She simply continued reading. "Subject to all recorded easements, reservations, access agreements, and separately titled adjoining parcels." Nobody reacted, except me, because those words sounded strangely familiar. Recorded easements, separately titled adjoining parcels. Grandpa's survey map flashed through my mind. The narrow strip of land, 40 feet wide, running from the highway to the lake. Margaret closed the will. "The house officially transfers after probate." Ryan barely waited for the sentence to finish. He stood. "So when can I move in?" Margaret answered calmly, "Once the paperwork is processed." Ryan laughed. "I'll start this weekend." 3 days later, he did exactly that. Moving trucks rolled into the property, contractors arrived.
The family came to celebrate. Mom posted photos online. Ryan is keeping Dad's legacy alive. Dad proudly showed neighbors around. They replaced locks, ordered expensive furniture, even discussed tearing down Grandpa's old workshop. I drove past once, stopped across the road, watched for a moment, then kept driving. I didn't call, didn't argue, didn't threaten anyone. Grandpa had told me something years earlier. Land always tells the truth. People don't. The following Monday, Margaret called. "Danny, I found something." "What?" "What kind of file?" "I'd rather show you." Her office sat inside an old brick building downtown. She placed a faded blue folder on the conference table. Across the front, written in Grandpa's handwriting, Property File 22B. She opened it. Inside sat the same survey map Grandpa had shown me years earlier, only this one contained official county stamps. Highlighted in red was the 40-foot strip leading from the highway directly to the lake house. Margaret closed the will. "Recognize it?"
I nodded slowly. "Grandpa showed me this once." She smiled. "He wanted you to remember." She slid another document toward me. A deed. Recorded 7 years earlier. Owner, Daniel Robert Foster. I stared at it. "What is this?" "Your grandfather transferred this parcel to you." 7 years ago. I looked up. "I don't understand." Margaret leaned back. "Neither does your family." She pointed to the survey. "The lake house belongs to Ryan." I nodded. "But—" She tapped the red strip. "You own the only legal access road." Silence. Complete silence. I looked from the map to the deed, back to Margaret. There has to be another entrance. There isn't. The neighboring farms? Private property. The lake? Private shoreline. She smiled slightly. The only recorded access belongs to you. Suddenly, Grandpa's words echoed inside me. Most expensive dirt in this county. I finally understood. The house wasn't the asset. Access was. Without legal access, no utilities, no deliveries, no emergency vehicles, no resale, no development, no financing, no practical use. Ryan owned a beautiful house sitting behind land he couldn't legally cross without my permission. I laughed. Not loudly, just once. Margaret smiled. "He knew." "He planned this?" She nodded, very carefully. Then she handed me one final envelope, written across the front, "Open only after they move in." My hands trembled. Inside, a handwritten letter. "Danny, if you're reading this, then your brother rushed toward the house before understanding the land." I couldn't help smiling. Grandpa knew Ryan perfectly. The letter continued. "People spend their lives chasing buildings. Smart people protect the ground beneath them." I felt tears filling my eyes. I gave Ryan exactly what he always wanted, something impressive. I gave you much more valuable, control. Margaret quietly stood. "There's something else." She pulled another folder from the cabinet. "This road isn't just access." I frowned. "What else?" She pointed to several recorded easements. Water, sewer, electric, fiber optic. Every single utility serving the lake house crossed my land. Every single one. Grandpa hadn't left me a road. He'd left me the entire infrastructure. 2 weeks later,
Ryan called, for the first time since the funeral. His voice wasn't confident anymore. "Danny." "Yeah?" "We've got a problem." I stayed quiet. "The county denied my renovation permit." "I know." "What do you mean, you know?" "They explained why?" Silence. Then, "There's an access issue." I smiled. "There is?" "You own that road?" "I do." Another long silence. Finally, "You planned this." "No, Grandpa did." Ryan cursed under his breath, then hung up. The next morning, Mom showed up at my office. She looked exhausted. "Danny, can we talk?" "Sure." She sat across from my desk. "We're family." I nodded. "We are." She forced a smile. "Ryan didn't realize." "I know. You could just sign the easement." I looked out the window for a long moment, then quietly asked, "When Grandpa needed someone to rebuild that dock, where was Ryan?" She looked away. "When he sat through chemotherapy, where were you?" Tears filled her eyes. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I wanted honest answers. She had none. A week later, Dad arrived. He skipped the small talk. "What do you want?" I smiled. "Nothing." "You've made your point." "No, I've honored Grandpa's." He slammed his hand on my desk. "That house belongs to your brother." I calmly slid the deed across the table. "So does the road belong to me." He stared at it, speechless. For the first time in my life, my father realized my grandfather hadn't overlooked me. He'd been watching all along. Probate officially closed 3 months later. Ryan received the lake house, exactly as Grandpa promised. I received the access land, exactly as Grandpa intended. 3 days after probate, a national resort developer contacted me. They wanted to purchase my 40-foot parcel, along with several adjoining tracts I already owned through my excavation business. Total offer, $8.6 million, cash. The sale would permanently eliminate private residential access to the lake house. Margaret looked at me. "The decision is yours." I thought about Grandpa, about fishing together, about everything he'd taught me. Then I made my choice. I accepted. Not because I wanted revenge, because Grandpa believed land should create opportunity. The development brought jobs, parks, public lake access, a new marina. Hundreds of local families benefited. Grandpa would have approved. Ryan eventually sold the lake house. Without exclusive access, its value dropped dramatically. He still made money, just nowhere near what he'd imagined. One autumn evening, almost a year after Grandpa passed, I sat on the shoreline watching the sunset, the same way Grandpa used to. His old tackle box rested beside me. Inside, folded neatly, was that faded survey map. I smiled, because I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach me all those years. People chase what shines. They ignore what matters. My family fought over the mansion. Grandpa quietly gave me the foundation beneath it. And in the end, that made all the difference. The end.